Welcome to another Food Label Maker webinar. Today's expert-led session will walk you through the key labeling regulations across 6 global markets and what you need to know to get your nutrition labels compliant from the start.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on navigating food labeling regulations across different key export markets. My name is Rachel, and I'm the Regulatory Affairs Lead at Food Label Maker. So thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. All right, so throughout the scope of nutrition labeling regulatory affairs, truly the question we get most often is, would it be possible to include the required languages on a single nutrition label when exporting? And today I'm here to tell you that the universal label is a myth and a dangerous one. So while trade is global, regulations are strictly local. A label isn't just a list of ingredients, it's a legal document. So when you ship to 6 different markets, you aren't just translating words, you are navigating 6 different sets of public health priorities. And this is what we call structural divergence. And that is our core focus today. We're going to break down the 6 divergent systems, including the high stakes US, Canadian, and Mexican markets, in addition to complex European, UK, and Australia, New Zealand frameworks. Before we get into the different export market regulations, I would like to introduce you to Food Label Maker. Food Label Maker is a global regulatory compliance platform for food and supplements. Our software is built based on the latest regulatory guidelines, which are continuously researched and updated by our regulatory affairs specialists. And this ensures that you stay, of course, compliant with the most up-to-date regulations, giving you peace of mind. And with over 25 years of experience in nutrition, labeling, and the F&B industry, our team understands the challenges food businesses face, and this helps us create a platform tailored to your specific needs. And today we are very proud to support over 10,000 customers worldwide and manage their recipes and label compliance. Okay, with that said, and before we dive into the webinar further, please take a moment to select the option that best describes your current labeling hurdle when it comes to maybe entering a new market. And by the way, don't worry if you have more than one, we will dive into the details shortly. I will be sharing a poll in the chat box, so feel free to answer right away. Okay, let's see which um, aspect of nutrition labeling you struggle the most with when exporting into a new market. Interesting. We have some mixed results here. Mhm. It seems that majority is struggling with the changing FOP mandates, whether maybe it's for Mexico or for Canada. No worries. This is a topic we will cover today in much detail. Rounding rules come in second. I know it can be a bit challenging when you apply different rounding rules for the same product for different markets. Okay, it seems that majority of the attendees today struggle with the FOP mandates. I know that today we will be discussing the FOP mandates for all 6 markets. So this is something we will be diving deeper into later today. And in second place, we have the rounding rules. We will be discussing the different rounding rules for each market and the different mandatory nutrients you will be adding. And lastly, I think, yes, so I think everyone finds it a bit challenging to redesign the layout of the label to fit the different mandatory font sizes. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for answering the poll. We will be moving on to our next slide. Just a minute, please. Okay. All right. So to help you navigate this global matrix, I've divided today's session into 6 key pillars. First, we will dig deeper into why a universal label does not exist, looking specifically at the conflicting legal frameworks. Second, we will cover nutritional panel differences. We'll compare rounding rules, units, in addition to why your per serving data doesn't always translate to per 100 grams. We will also look at the front of pack systems. So from Mexico's octagon seals as well as Canada's, we'll see how the same product can look vastly different on different shelves. We will also cover allergen requirements. And last but not least, we have our 2026 watch list. So we are currently in a massive transition year, and we will cover the high priority milestones that you need to be aware of right now. And finally, we will wrap up with 15 minutes of Q&A. Okay, so we will begin with the primary obstacle for exporters, which is, of course, the structural divergence. So in the regulatory sphere, a universal label is technically unfeasible because food labeling laws are sovereign. So they aren't designed to facilitate trade, they are designed to fulfill domestic policy. And when attempting to consolidate multiple markets into a single SKU, we enter what I call technical deadlocks. So, for example, the EU's height requirement often conflicts with the US FDA's perspective nutrition facts box dimensions and font styles. So, on a standard package, these different standards create a layout deadlock, making a single legally compliant label mathematically impossible. And this is only one basic aspect of many other standards. To understand the stakes, we must look at the actual cost of being compliant-ish. A label that you think is mostly right can be entirely wrong. So consider a container held at the border due to a minor rounding discrepancy, perhaps maybe declaring 0 grams of fat when the destination market's threshold requires a decimal declaration. The financial fallout here is immediate. So you might face fees or you might be forced into manual relabeling in a bonded facility, where the labor and logistics oftentimes cost double the original packaging price. And of course, beyond the direct costs, the brand damage is permanent. So missing a retail delivery window often leads to significant failure to supply fines and the loss of your approved supplier status. And that is our core focus today. We are going to break down the 6 divergent systems and analyze the specific points where these frameworks clash and how to structure your labeling data for 2026 compliance. Okay, before we get into the technical details, we need to acknowledge the gatekeepers. If you are exporting to these 6 markets, you are dealing with 6 different legal architectures. On this slide, you'll see the primary authorities we navigate daily. So in the EU, we deal with the UK's FSA has both retained regulations and evolving standards. In the United States, the FDA governs through prospective rules. In Canada, Health Canada and CFIA develop and enforce the regulations. And last but not least, the Australia and New Zealand Food Standards Code provides a unique binational standard for both countries. And lastly, we have COFEPRIS in Mexico. And this is where many exporters get caught off guard. Truly, there's a risky assumption in export that all agencies follow the same global rules when in reality they don't. And this means that there is no one global harmonization with different requirements far more prescriptive than the Codex guidelines. So with that said, let's see exactly how those mandates create the technical differences in your panels. Okay, so today we're going to evaluate one product, which is strawberry yogurt. As you can see, we're going to assess it across 6 different markets, and you will notice how the exact same product is going to end up with a very different nutrition label down the line for each market. Okay, I know this looks like a lot of labels. Don't worry, we will break them down in details. The differences come down to mainly layout, language, rounding rules, serving size, and mandatory nutrient declarations. Okay, let's start with the serving size. So you'll notice that each label presents a different serving size, even though it's the exact same product we're talking about. It's the strawberry yogurt product across different markets. And the serving size is a major area for divergence. So, for example, in the United States, serving sizes are based on the reference amounts customarily consumed, which are determined by the FDA based on large-scale nutrition surveys. So if people typically let's say, 30 grams of cereal, then that's going to be your serving size on the label. And this usually makes it easier for consumers to see exactly what they are eating without doing the math. Canada follows a similar approach, but they use the Health Canada's reference amounts. As you can see, the Canadian reference amount for yogurt is 115 grams, which is lower than the FDA's 170 grams serving size currently displayed on the label. When it comes to the European Union and the UK, both take a completely different approach. The primary basis is always 100 grams or 100 milliliters of product, as you can see on both labels. And usually this makes it easier for consumers uh, to compare products. The per portion information may be added, but it's optional. When it comes to Australia and New Zealand, both countries require both a per serving column and a per 100 grams of product column. And I think arguably this is the most consumer-friendly approach. It provides both amounts within one nutrition facts table. And lastly, for COFEPRIS in Mexico, Mexico requires a nutritional panel to be based on 100 grams or 100 milliliters of product, which uh, uh, which is declared on this label in the lower right corner, as you can see, and providing information per serving remains optional as well. Okay, so as you can see, one serving is a legal definition that changes at every border. So verifying the local reference amount is your first step in avoiding a compliance rejection. Okay, now let's move on to the mandatory nutrients. So here's where it gets a bit more complex. Um, the FDA has the longest list since its 2016 rule update. So as you can see, the FDA label includes calories, total fat, saturated fat, trans fat, and cholesterol, alongside sodium, total carbs, dietary fiber, and total sugars. Notice that there is a field also for added sugars, which is a mandatory field to display per FDA, alongside protein, vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. On the other hand, I want you please to focus on the Canadian label. And I want you to notice that, of course, there are 13 core nutrients displayed. However, notably, Canada does not have a separate added sugars field, unlike the FDA label. So this is one difference between both. The EU and UK use a shorter mandatory core, which includes energy in both units, kilojoules and kilocalories. This also includes fat, saturates, available carbohydrates, which be careful, this is not the total carbs in the product. This is just the available carbohydrates, in addition to sugars, protein, and salt. Dietary fiber is voluntary, which surprises many clients usually coming from the US market. Australia and New Zealand also require energy. Yes, as I said, they require energy in both units. And lastly, Mexico. Mexico takes it a step further. Their mandatory list focuses heavily on critical nutrients, specifically added sugars and trans fats, as these values are used to trigger their famous black octagon warning seals as part of the front of pack label mandate. Okay, so with that said, the bottom line here is that you aren't just translating the labels, you are recalibrating your data to fit the specific public health priorities of each country. Okay, let's move on to the rounding rules. This is a hidden pitfall where auditors catch a lot of errors. Even with the exact same lab results, your final numbers on the labels will change because each country has its own mathematical logic for the label. So take energy and fat as two examples. The FDA, for example, uses a tiered system, rounding calories to the nearest 5 or 10, and fats to the nearest zero point 0.5 grams. Meanwhile, the EU, UK, and Australia and New Zealand allow for much more precision, often rounding to the nearest 1 calorie or zero point 0.1 grams of fats. Mexico and Canada have their own specific brackets that fall somewhere in between. Another example we can notice here is protein. Notice how protein is added as a whole number in certain labels and as number rounded to the nearest zero point 0.1 grams in others. And this is mainly due to the rounding rules for each market. Okay, so this is for the rounding rules. When it comes to the percentage daily value, the US and Canada both use the percentage daily value based on a 2,000 calorie diet, with Canada also requiring a bilingual declaration in English and French. The EU and UK use the percentage reference intake, which is voluntary but commonly displayed on labels. And lastly, Australia and New Zealand use the percentage daily intake, which is based on average adult requirements, and COFEPRIS uses the percentage VDR, and both of these systems are voluntary, as you can see. Next up, we have languages and layout. A quick note on that is that each market follows its own specific requirements for font, sizes, structure, and overall labeling formats. As you can see, each label has a different format and layout. For example, Canada requires both English and French to appear on the label, whereas Mexico mandates Spanish as the required language. And with all these differences explained, I think it's now clear that no single NFT exists for all markets. Each requires a unique format, language, nutrient set, and calculation basis. Okay, moving on to allergens. This is the slide. This slide is critical for any cross-border products, as the number of mandatory allergens varies across different regulatory bodies. So, for example, the US now covers 9 major allergens following the FASTER Act of 2021. Canada, on the other hand, lists 14 priority allergens, and it is the most comprehensive list in North America. The EU and UK also require 14 allergens, and post-Brexit, the UK has retained that list. Australia and New Zealand cover 11 allergens, including lupine, which is not found in the US top 9 allergens to be declared. And lastly, COFEPRIS mandates only 8 allergens, which is a shorter list than other countries. Companies exporting to Mexico who are used to declaring the 14 EU allergens should check which of those are actually mandatory in Mexico versus which are voluntary best practice. Okay, so this is for allergens. Now let's move on to allergen declaration or the allergen declaration method. Um, In the United States and per FDA regulations, allergens can be declared either through a separate contained statement, as you can see here, or through bolding the allergens within the ingredient statement. Um, Canada also follows a similar approach, so you can either have a separate contained statement, or you can also bold the allergens in the ingredient statement. In the EU and UK, however, allergens must be emphasized within the ingredient list itself, most commonly in bold, and with no requirements for a separate contains box. So as you can see, allergens for UK, EU are highlighted in the ingredient statement itself. When it comes to Australia and New Zealand, um, it's a bit more flexible. It also allows either a contained statement or endless highlighting. And lastly, for Mexico, Mexico also relies on a contained statement to declare the allergens, as you can see here. Okay, now that we've covered the allergens, let's take a look at the ingredient statements. While all markets require ingredients to be listed in descending order by weight, of course, there are some key differences. So, for EU, UK, Australia, and New Zealand, these countries require the percentage declaration for certain key ingredients. Oftentimes, these ingredients are characterizing ingredients that are mentioned in a product's name or present visually on a product's package. In the ingredient statements are mainly due to the QUID declaration for UK, EU, and Australia and New Zealand. We can also narrow it down to the sugar grouping for Canada and Mexico. So sugars should be grouped in the ingredient statement of these two markets. And yes, so this is for Canada and Mexico. And with these differences explained, I think the takeaway here is that you cannot simply translate an ingredient statement. You have to re-audit the entire formula to ensure every local priority allergen is correctly identified and the proper ingredient format is added, whether it's the QUID or the sugar grouping as well. Okay, moving on to the front of pack labeling, which is probably the fastest evolving area in food labeling globally. We will start with Mexico. So Mexico introduced the octagonal black warning seals in 3 phases, starting October 2020. So if a product exceeds specific nutrient thresholds for calories, total sugars, saturated fat, trans fat, or sodium per 100 grams of product or 100 milliliters, it must carry the corresponding black seal on the front of pack. So this is one example of how a seal would look like on the front of pack label. And by the way, Mexico also mandates separate icons if a product contains sweeteners or caffeine that are not recommended for children. And these are unique to Mexico and they are not seen in the other 5 markets as well. Let's move on to Canada. Canada follows closely with its own mandatory FOP system, and this is effective since January 2026. The Canadian system uses a black magnifying glass symbol, declaring declaring a high in statement for total sugars, sodium, and saturated fats. So when these nutrients exceed specific thresholds, they are declared uh, as part of the magnifying glass FOP label. And unlike Mexico's warning approach, the Canadian system is not explicitly warning oriented. It's more informational. So through the black icons, this clearly signals a high in specific nutrient content statement. Moving on to the EU. The EU situation is a bit complex. So the Nutri-Score is a 5-level A to E. color-coded system, which originated in France and has been voluntarily adopted by uh, multiple EU countries. The European Commission had committed under the Farm to Fork strategy to propose a mandatory harmonized EU-wide FOP system. However, that proposal has been delayed, and as of our knowledge, no mandatory EU FOP law is in force. But the direction does travel towards more mandatory harmonization. Next up, we have the UK traffic light FOP. The UK system is the traffic light system, which assigns red, amber, and green color codes to energy, total fat, saturated fat, sugars, and salt per portion. And this has been the dominant voluntary system used by the UK retailers since 2013. Post Brexit, the UK has not adopted any EU style uh, FOP label formats, and it has not mandated the traffic light system yet. So it remains best practice rather than law as of now. And last but not least, we have the health star rating for Australia and New Zealand. Um, Australia and New Zealand both use the health star rating system, which is zero point 0.5 to 5 stars, and it was introduced back in 2014. The algorithm basically considers energy, saturated fat, sodium, and total sugars negatively, and fiber, protein, and fruit and vegetable content positively. So basically, both countries participate jointly in the health star rating system. And mandatory conversion has been discussed, but not implemented yet. So it remains voluntary to add the health star label. And lastly, we move forward to the FDA. The US currently has no mandatory front of pack systems, though the FDA has published a draft guidance and has signaled interest in an FOP framework, but no rule has been finalized yet. So this is still a work in progress that we will make sure to update you on whenever it becomes an officially legal FOP label. Okay. As we move towards the conclusion of today's session, I want to leave you with a clear roadmap of what is on the immediate horizon, basically. So we are moving away from trial periods and voluntary pilot programs into a phase of hard enforcement and standardized global frameworks. So basically, let's look at the three critical watchouts your regulatory teams should be tracking right now. First and foremost, the most urgent is Canada's FOP mandate. So we have talked about the magnifying glass symbol FOP throughout the session, but the date to circle in red is or was January 2026. And this is not a start by date. This is a hard enforcement deadline since that's been added since the beginning of the year. So this is one thing to keep an eye out on. Another thing is the FDA's standardized shift. So, turning to the FDA, we are seeing a significant pivot. Most importantly, you have to watch out for the redefinition of healthy. The FDA is updating the criteria for when a brand can actually use the word healthy on a label. And by the way, we did host a webinar on labeling claims for FDA. So if you are interested in knowing more about that, you can visit our webinars page and watch the labeling claims webinar. And finally, let's move on to Latin America, where we are entering the maturity phase. Basically, Mexico hit phase three, which is the strictest tier of nutrient thresholds for the FOP seals. And basically, products that escaped a seal in phase one or phase two uh, might trigger now an FOP seal now that the limits for sodium and sugar have dropped down further. Okay, so these are the three watch outs for 2026 so far. So make sure you keep an eye out on creating the necessary FOP labels for Canada, applying the correct claims for FDA, and assessing the nutrient thresholds for Mexico as per phase 3 requirements. Okay, as we wrap up today's session, just remember no single label works for every market. Your goal is to stay agile, stay compliant, and stay market specific. And that's why I created this strategic implementation roadmap to serve as a checklist for you whenever you are creating a label for a new market that you will be exporting your products into. So, as a reminder, always make sure that you assess the serving size that's going to be displayed on the label. Make sure that it falls within the reference amount that is suggested by each regulatory body, and make sure if you need to add in both a per 100 grams breakdown column or just a per serving column instead. Make sure you add in the mandatory nutrients as per the details we've discussed. And of course, make sure to round your nutrients per the rounding rules. If you'd like to know more about the rounding rules, our team can share with you more details on that. And also do take care of allergen declaration on each market's label, and the way ingredient statements should be written out. As I said before, it's not just listing the ingredients in decreasing weight order. It's also about assigning QUID whenever it's necessary, and grouping sugars whenever the market calls for it. And this is mainly for Canada and Mexico. And last but not least, always assess your nutrient thresholds and check if an FOP label is required, whether it's for Mexico or for Canada. And then finally, always make sure that you have a legible layout that's in line with the regulatory requirements of each body. Okay. Um, with with that said, I'd like to know your answers a bit more regarding what stood out to you the most from today's discussion. I will be adding a poll in the chat box in a minute, so feel free to answer it right away. Okay, let's see which regulatory piece stood out the most to you when it comes to exporting to different markets and the different regulations for the different markets discussed. Interesting results. I see a lot of you that need a better system than actually manually um, editing the labels to fit each market's format. FOP formats remain the most important aspect of today's discussion. Interesting. Yes, layout deadlocks come in second. I know it can be a bit tricky to find the exact font size, layout, and language and nutrient order for each label. Great. I think we can all agree that manually editing the labels is prone to some discrepancy and some uh, regulations that might be missed. So this is why our team is ready to assist you in any questions you might have when it comes to the different regulations. Feel free to scan this QR code if you'd like to speak with our consultants. If you want to have a more one-on-one call to discuss your labeling needs further, please do scan the code and our team would be more than happy to assist you. And by the way, our solution does automatically transform your label into the different market formats whenever you add in your recipe or your nutritional information. So I think this would um, resolve everyone's concern when it comes to manually editing the labels to have them fit each market's regulatory requirements. And if you're interested also in having our team create the different labels for you, we do offer this as part of our Hire an Expert service. And we do also cover both conventional foods and supplements. So if you need us to create your labels or maybe transform them into other market formats, our team is experienced in the different regulations, as we mentioned, and we will be more than happy to assist you further in creating your labels. Again, if you'd like to contact our team, feel free to scan this QR code and schedule a more in-depth one-on-one session.